Hi, and welcome to our live event. My name is Michael Smith. I'm the lead pastor of Trinity United Methodist Church in Mullica Hill, New Jersey. Whether you're watching with us live right now or you're going to watch this later at another point, I'm so glad that you're able to join us to check out some information about what we're talking about tonight, which is the future of the United Methodist Church. We're going to have a conversation about our hopes and about some of the changes that are happening within our denomination. So, in order to understand really where we are now as a denomination, you kind of need to look back. We're going to have a dialogue. I'm going to share with you a little bit of our history, a little bit of our hopes, and we're going to encourage you to ask some questions, make some comments. As we do so, this really is about some information and dialogue. And I promise you that if you have a question or comment that we're not able to address in the next couple minutes, we will get to it. Okay. I will make sure to follow up with you. And my email address is listed there here as part of this live to reach out to me with your continued comments or questions. So, how did we get to where we are now? Let's jump in. I'm going to give you 319 years of Methodist history in 3 minutes and 19 seconds. Buckle your seatbelts. Here we go. All right. Back in 1703, John Wesley was born. His brother Charles was born just a few years after that, and the world was never going to be the same. Because what happens, these brothers that we call the Wesley brothers started to take their faith seriously. In fact, today is actually Aldersgate Day in our tradition, which is the day where John Wesley felt his heart strangely warmed. And so what happens is that as they started to grow in their faith, uh, John Wesley was a priest in the Church of England, but there was something that was disconnecting. He decided to take the good news of Jesus Christ to every person, to the folks in his community, out in the fields, in the coal mines, wherever, in the streets of London. And this movement called Methodism was born. It was probably a derogatory term at first with those people called Methodists because the Wesley brothers and others believed that indeed there was a method by which we could love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. They believe that, the things that we receive as like a means of grace, of God doing something in our heart and lives was meant to be translated out into the community. So we have not only growing in works of grace or piety, but we are called to do works of mercy to care for one another in our community. Back in those days, as the Methodists started to make their way to this new land called America, the colonies, it started to take, root and really grow fast because they didn't need a big old steeple and a building to have church. They'd meet in a barn, they meet out in the field, they'd just have gatherings because part of the DNA of the people called Methodists was an emphasis on community. So right around this, period of the Revolutionary War, back if you think about what was going on in our country, this movement called Methodism was just on almost every little town. If you wonder why there is a Methodist church seemingly in every little town in our state, it's because it was about a horse and a carriage ride away. They would build these churches. As in anything, you get to the period of the 1800s, and in any kind of organization, movement to institution, there's going to be forming, storming, and norming. So there was a period of storming all throughout the 1800s, where as they started to get established, they noticed people started to think differently about some different things. So you have people that don't necessarily like the bishops. You've got people that don't want to pay for their pews. That was a weird historical thing. That's how the Free Methodists split off. There's all of these different splits and all of these reconnections. If you remember in the 1800s, there was a thing called the Civil War, disagreements about slavery. That also impacted the church and how people viewed that. The people of Methodists wrestled with those times. So as we get to where we are after all of the years and all of the centuries, I've got 10 seconds left. We formed the United Methodist Church in 1968. And ever since that time, we've been trying to figure out how to grow together and how to be in community. But guess what? Did you ever notice that even with millions of people worldwide, we don't agree about everything? Okay, that's really tough to do 3 minutes and 19 seconds worth of history. Uh, I, yeah, I needed more time. But how did we get to where we are now? Well, within our denomination, there's some disagreement about how to interpret different things, how to think about who we are as a church. We are a global church, so that means we're going to think differently about things. Particularly, one of the uh, ways and conversations we're having is related to human sexuality. Um, Look, if you Google the United Methodist Church right now, you're probably going to find most articles that talk about division. So we are going to talk a little bit about that, but really, we kind of need to understand where we are now and where we hope to go. And for me, as an ordained clergy person in the United Methodist Church, I just wanted to share with you why I love this beautiful mess that is called the United Methodist Church. So I just got 5 quick things I wanted to highlight for you. As much as I wish I could have done a better job with the history, let me share with you 5 things that I really appreciate about being a United Methodist. We are a people called to grace. We're all about grace. We take the Bible very seriously. We, as the people called the via media or the middle way, offer a third way in a divided world, in a polarized world. We, as God's people, can show the way of Jesus, which is a new way to, even though we may not think like, we can still love like. So, this is a new way to live in our world. We don't have to be on one side or the other. We have a message of grace, a scriptural message that helps people live not on the extremes, but in the deep middle where actual problems are solved and where people can be welcomed. Community is part of our DNA. All the way back to the Holy Club with John Wesley, we believe relationships matter. So that's why we talk so much about community here at Trinity. And I believe as the United Methodist, we can do more together than we could ever apart. We are a connectional church, and I'm thankful for the connection of which we are a part of. We're not a perfect church. If you find one, I mean, good luck. But I believe in the people called Methodists, and I believe that for such a time as this, we are ready to live into the fullness of our mission and ministry. Particularly here at Trinity, our mission is to encounter, engage, and to empower people to become disciples of Jesus Christ. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about as well. But you've heard enough about me. We have a very special guest tonight, which I know you're anxious to get to see and to hear. Let me welcome and introduce to some of you Reverend Glenn Conaway, who is a former pastor here at Trinity, served here for 24 years, and is currently serving as the superintendent of the Delaware Bay District. Pastor Glenn, thanks so much for being a part of this live event tonight. I shared, 5 things that I love about being a Methodist. I'm curious, what do you think of that list? And you want to add any more to that?
Sure. Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be back and to, well, I know I can't actually see everybody, but it's great to be back and be a part of this team again tonight. Yeah, there are some things that I probably would add to that. I think one of the things I've always appreciated about the United Methodist Church is Wesley's 3 simple rules that we were all taught growing up and were a part of even in our ordination. And the 3 simple rules are simply do all the good that you can, and it reminding us that we're doing all this for Jesus Christ. To do no harm. Our job is not to go out there and do harm to another's life or another's soul. And we have to think about what am I thinking, what am I acting, how am I acting out, and then the last one that is so important is stay in love with God. And that is something that has always reminded me in the Methodist Church is that we are moving on to perfection. We are moving on to holiness. We talk about that a lot in the United Methodist Church. And the idea is that it is a lifelong journey, and we are striving for this at all times. And so I think what I've always appreciated is that people come in at different levels. Some people come in with a lot of understanding about grace and God, and some people come in with no understanding whatsoever. And we all are met where we're at, and we get to grow. And we're not judged for that. And so I've always appreciated that in the church growing up. That was what I experienced in the United Methodist Church. And I was fortunate to experience a lot of Wesley started with a lot of small groups, and we hear about those class groups and those and basically accountable groups to each other. But I think that's still a part of our DNA. And growing up, those groups were things for me were things like, the youth choir, the MYF, the youth groups, the Bible studies, and other things. And those groups have always been a part of my life. Even today, when I'm joining in with groups, they're still a very important part of my life. And being able to grow together, again, reminding me that I haven't attained it all, that I'm still learning as I go along. So those are some of the other things I think are really important for me um, in the United Methodist Church and being a part of this denomination.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Pastor Glenn. You know, I know that you're a history major, and I know I totally butchered the history of the Methodist Church. That's okay. You'll forgive me for that. But, you've got a lot of history at this congregation. I know there's a lot of people watching that have some funny memories and want to give you a shout out right now. So I want everybody watching. Pastor Glenn was here for 24 years. Show him some love. Say hi to him. Tell a funny memory that you have of him. Maybe you went to high school with Pastor Glenn and Moses, and you have some funny stories about going to high school with him. But yeah, go make sure you take a moment to say hi to Pastor Glenn. And there we go. Thanks, Nance. Rick and I are watching. Yeah, we're gonna have a good time tonight. Matthew, all right, thanks, buddy. Yeah, go ahead. Dave, appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. All right, Jenny and Bob are here. Watch out now. Rachel's here. Awesome. Great. So a lot of folks are watching. If you got some questions, go ahead and put them in. Let's talk a little bit really about some of the things that we're facing as a denomination is that, we're trying to figure out how to live in community, how to disagree, how to live with difference. And so a lot of the articles that you'll read about online may not fully capture that conversation, because a lot of the time our conversation is more at each other rather than with each other. And I know, like here at Trinity, and Glenn, you've been here for 24 years. I haven't even been here for 24 months. Tell me a little bit about the way the local church, particularly Trinity, has been able to navigate relationships, build relationships with the community, and just be the local church in Mullica Hill, because you've got some history here. I'd love to hear some stories.
Sure. So I think some of the things that really happened when I came into Mullica Hill, it was still a farming community that was emerging into a suburb. A lot of developments were going on, a lot of building was going on. And one of the things that we did was we started to reach out into the community. And we really, it meant that we were going to have to invite neighbors in, neighbors that we didn't know, neighbors that we may not always agree with, and ask them to be a part of the church and to come in and join us. And that wasn't just with youth groups or with a choir or anything, but we were trying to find different ways to invite them in and be a part of that. And I can remember people actually getting out there and going from door to door and getting to know their neighbors. And when neighbors would move in, they would say, well, if you don't have a church, why don't you come and try my church? And why don't you come and bring your kids here? So it was a lot of invitation that the congregation was making and working at that to bring people in. And then they really took off on doing a lot of ministry in the community. I think of things like the VBS was one of the big things. They just kept growing and growing with VBS and just building that up. So they were inviting, kids that weren't just from Trinity or, and just right there, but they were inviting kids from the community to come in and be a part of that. I think Camp Blast, which I know ran its course, but the thing was, in its day, Camp Blast was something that we were able to reach out to the community. Almost all of those kids did not come to Trinity. And it gave us a way of, again, getting into the community, getting into people's homes. We showed up to things like Harrison Township Day, and then inviting others to participate in some of our outreach ministries, whether that was your place at the table, whether that was the concert series that we brought in at one point. Some will remember we did plays for about 4 summers in a row. We did these big productions. Would be a big production for Trinity, and that got to be known in the community. And most of the people coming, even people in the cast, were not a part of Trinity. So I think one of the things that the church really worked at was they didn't just serve for themselves. They thought of who is it in the community that we can reach out to. And I will never forget that when we got ready to vote for the new location and the new church, when we took that vote, I've never forgotten that night. And there was 100 people in the sanctuary that were going to vote for this, and one of the oldest members got up at that point and made the comment. This is where my, family grew up. This is where our kids were baptized. This is where we've watched people be buried from. And I thought, oh, we're not going to, this isn't going to pass now. And then the person made the comment, but if we are going to reach the next generation for Jesus Christ, I am willing to give all of that up so that somebody else can experience Christ like I have. And with that, the vote was 98 in favor, none against, and 2 abstentions. And so that's where that vote went that night. And that was a lot of the attitude. We have to be reaching out and finding ways to invite people in to experience Christ. And so we did that, whether it was through a camp program or, like I said, Sunday school, Stephen's ministry. Things just developed, and a lot of it was lay driven. It wasn't just because there was staff, myself, or at the time Paul or some others that would be there. We were working at it, but the staff, the laity, really picked it up and did a lot of that work for us. And so I think those are some of the great things that really helped us move forward.
Yeah, navigating change. I think hope is a major driver to help us with this dangerous feeling of whenever we're going through different changes in a local church, in a denomination. You mentioned Pastor Paul. I'd be curious, I think there's a lot of us friends with Pastor Paul on Facebook. But go ahead and give some love to Pastor Paul as well. And I'll give you an announcement now. On Sunday, June 26th, Pastor Paul's going to be preaching at Trinity. So you don't want to miss that. So bring your tomatoes and greet Pastor Paul on Sunday.
He's using one of my old ones. No.
Oh, Glenn. Oh, I wish we had time to hear that full story about the hulu dance you did on the table. That's, boy, lots of fun memories there. Thanks for sharing, Nancy. I'm sure there's others. Hey, I want to share with you a quick video from Pastor Bruce Phillips. We had a chance just to talk with him this week. And if, Glenn went to high school with Moses, Pastor Phillips went to high school with Abraham. So check out some of Pastor Bruce's hopes for us as a congregation. This is Pastor Bruce Phillips.
Well, they were nice. As every church I've been to, they were nice people. They were nice people. It's grown. It's incredibly much bigger. Much smaller when I was there. Right. I was in the old church on Main Street. So the new sanctuary is so much bigger now than it was before. Well, you hope that they'll reach to the community, that they'll minister to the people that are there.
Great. Thank you, Pastor Bruce. He mentioned that, and I've seen this too, just the people. It's the people in the church and their grace and they're nice. He talked about some of the things that he navigated. He was the pastor when we were on Main Street, and getting to just have that history in our community as well. And he lifted up at the end that he hopes for us that we might continue to be a people who connect with our community. One of the things I love about our congregation too is we don't all think alike, and I don't think that's a recent thing. I know throughout probably Pastor Glenn, your tenure here, you've had to navigate different seasons of disagreement, and what's your approach to help continue the dialogue to get people to share about how to focus on the main thing?
So I think one of the things that we really tried to work on, and you're correct, Michael. I mean, we didn't always agree on everything, and there were times when there was a shift. As a matter of fact, if you went back to church statistics and what they tell us is that in the 20, they say that every 6 years a congregation changes. Whether it changes, with the people in front of you, or it just changes because of the culture and everything around you. So that meant I had to navigate in 24 years. I was navigating 4 different times, and so we had to navigate from, being very traditional. When I first arrived, you had the 3 scripture lessons. We sang the Gloria Patri, to moving to a more blended service, and then moving to a totally contemporary service. And I can remember us calling that the family and friends, because there was only about 10 people in there. One of the ways that we navigated was we decided to commit to each other. And so I'll just use that service as an example. When we started that, we made a commitment that we would work at this together as a team for an entire year. We would pray about this. We would have people that would be there every Sunday. We would be set up and ready to go, and to see what would happen. And for months, that service only grew to the most of like 50. And then all of a sudden it just took off, and it ended up dominating our Sunday mornings, where it was the largest service and probably the most diverse, because we had people coming in there who had grown up with all different kinds of theological backgrounds, but all were melting together in that one space. And a lot of that was trying to keep our focus on, how do I find God in my everyday life? How do I find Christ that's going to walk with me today and with my family and through this whole week? So we had to deal with that while I was there. So that would be one aspect of where we were working with that. The community was growing at a rapid rate, and some people were not happy about that. Some people were losing their small town feel and their small church feel, to have to navigate through this. So again, I think a lot of it had to deal with, we sat down and said, what is most important for the ministry that we're doing? What is it we're called to do here? And so it was, again, reinterpreting our call. What is our call? Why are we here and at this time? And having to relocate out of the center of town, we had to think those things through. So I think part of it was, that commitment that we made to each other. There were moments when we actually had to say we agreed to disagree on certain subjects. And we're just not going to see eye to eye on some of this. But what we are going to do is we are going to keep working for the betterment of the whole church, sharing Christ. And we're going to continue to do that. And so we had to work through that. We had groups that before the prayer meeting or the Sunday prayers that were done in my office while we were worshiping. I can remember when that got developed, but there was whole groups that were actually praying for Trinity. And I think that became a real core. They found the common ground, and that's what they pushed towards. Not where they differed, but where they found the common ground. When I ran Disciple Bible Study, we actually were running, which you're only supposed to have 12. We were actually running 20 people in Disciple Bible Study. And I can remember 2 of those years, we had a very diverse group. We had people that leaned in some theological circles much more maybe to the left, and then some others that leaned more to the right. But what we did on Sunday nights was, and we didn't get into a debate about it, we sat there and listened to each other. and we really had to work at that. But at the end of 36 weeks of doing that, people were keeping focused on the scriptures. They were keeping focused on God. They were keeping focused on not trying to get somebody to think their way, but to hear people and say, okay, this is where I believe God is taking me. And sometimes just saying, I may not agree with that. And so I don't know if that helps anybody. I think that's a little bit where we were. A lot of commitment to each other, commitment to focusing on the ministry of what our job was, to get out into the community and share Christ. So,
I, I think you can see all throughout church history, even that, we as disciples of Jesus Christ have been trying to figure out these things. You can read about it in the book of Acts about, the Apostle Peter and the Apostle Paul. They didn't always agree about everything, and they figured
right.
out some stuff. Peter changed his mind about some things. Paul changed his mind about some things. You see the mystery of the power of community in this way. You know, it's not easy, and I know it's challenging, particularly within our denomination. There are some churches that are seeking what is a word that we call disaffiliation, that they no longer desire to be a part of the community of the United Methodist Church. That's really one of the things that a lot of folks are talking about now. And again, this is not necessarily new. The people called Methodists, the people called Christians have been finding different iterations and ways of trying to live out faithfully their calling. So again, this is not brand new to us, but we're trying to navigate these waters. And again, what you've shared is something that helps us figure out how to come together for the common good. We're in a sermon series right now. We're talking about building bridges. How do we come together? How do we unite in the midst of a world that forces us to other sides or extremes? I know some people are wanting some, how do we navigate this? I'm curious, is there anybody that has comments about that? That's in, if you've got questions, we'll talk more about this. But for us, it's something that we're aware of, that we feel deeply that there's other United Methodist congregations that don't want to be part of the United Methodist Church. And so that's something I think we are wrestling with the most. So, I mean, I know that's really not a question, Pastor Glenn. I just wanted to share. I know you work with a lot of different churches. Nancy says
Sure.
diversity always makes for a stronger organization. Churches, schools, community groups, work. That's why God made us all different, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the beauty. Pastor Glenn, what are some of your thoughts about the current state of where we find ourselves now? Any information or future resources that you can point us to? But again, this isn't the end of the conversation. It's just the beginning. But what's some of your wisdom?
Sure. So diversity. I think diversity can make us stronger, because I learn from other people's ideas. So I went to a very conservative university, theologically, as an Asbury grad, but then I did Eastern Baptist, or became Palmer, and that had a much more central, when I was there, view and differences of theological views. But I learned in both locations a tremendous amount of how to begin to work with people across some of the things that divide us and can work together. The United Methodist Church, this is not new. We have had divisions, during the Civil War. The church split north and south. The church split again in the 30s. There was still some of that when it became, if you look over some of our church doors, it's Methodist Episcopal as Methodist Protestant. And so in some of your churches, in some of your towns, that's why you'll see, the different things that are there. So that we had those divisions amongst us. And I think, going forward, as we've just come out of annual conference, yes, there is, for churches that want to disaffiliate, there is a plan for them now to do that. And we had to wait. I know some people have wanted information, and why can we have information? It was really premature to give information until a vote was taken at annual conference, exactly on how some things happen. So we just ended annual conference, and we have a 6-step discernment process that for a church that wants to do that. And I think what's important is that it's about a discernment process, That's where it begins. It does not begin with an immediate, we're voting, we're out the door. It's about discerning what will this do to our congregation? What will this do to our ministry? What effects will it have on the people that are sitting in the pews? Um, and part of that process also is about learning how to covenant together. So one of the steps is called a connectional covenant, which is not a legal agreement, but it actually calls for us to be together and saying we are going to respect each other. We are going to guide each other through this and help each other, and that we will not be disparaging towards one another. And that goes back to those Wesley rules that I talked about earlier, where we will not do harm to somebody else. When we're doing this, we're going to stay in love with God as we're working through it. And when a congregation has done its due diligence and has looked at that, if they feel that they need to leave, then I think we leave amicably. We show grace and mercy, and we allow that. But we then have to look at some of these procedures that actually have to take place with what's called a disaffiliation agreement, and we begin to work through that process. And so there are steps. We'll be talking to churches this year about that process if they would like to do that. I've talked to a couple of churches about what that actually means for them. And some have already said, no, we're not leaving the United Methodist Church. I think there is room for where you stand in agreement or disagreement. I think there is room still to be able to do that. And so some have chosen to say, no, we're not going anywhere. We're staying right with the Methodist Church, and we're just going to, this is going to be a struggle, and we're going to work through it together. But we know the ministry that we do right here and right in this community. So I think that's one of the things that we have to remember. What does this do to us and our witness of Christ in the community? We have to ask ourselves that question. I realize I have to deal with a denomination at large, but I also am saying for a local church, you really need to ask, what does this do to us and our witness here in the community? What ministries get hurt as we move forward, and how can we do the right thing? So I don't know if that helps a little bit, but there is some of that. Yeah,
it does. I think it really does. You raised some great questions for us to consider. Let's see, are there any other questions that are coming up? Let's see. Karen, thank you. Can you talk about the reasons some churches are planning to leave the conference? Pastor Glenn, I'll let you take that one.
Sure. So, hi, Karen. So one of the reasons, or some of the reasons that people would leave right now, of what people are going through, is on the issue of human sexuality. So, not going to hide that. That's out there, and where they're not happy with some of the positions in some of the United Methodist Church, and so the Judicial Council has put forth a way of that being able to be done for anyone to disaffiliate, and that would be done under paragraph 2553 of the 2019 discipline. And that's part of those steps that I just talked about, that allows for them to leave on grounds of human sexuality. But there's also a way for churches that are remaining to actually create a covenant that says, we have certain traditional views that we want to keep and maintain, and we're going to make a covenant that says those are the views that we are going to keep in this local church. And so you can even go through that process and not do that. But that's one of the biggest reasons why some churches are planning to leave the conference, or not just our annual conference, but why they're looking to leave the United Methodist Church.
Okay, thank you. One of the things I want to remind us is we always have an opportunity as those who are United Methodists. We, and part of our membership vow is we are called to give a witness. All right, so what is our witness? And one of the things I want to remind us of is that a lot of times, particularly in the past couple of years, the United Methodist Church has been started to know what it's more for what it's against, more than what we are for, that we haven't leaned into the deep word of grace that we have to share, the transforming power of God's love in Jesus Christ. We started to just get into it about things and different understandings of this and that. Um, we're going to continue to keep these conversations going. I know there may be some more questions in there. It's already been, a good 37 minutes for this live event. We will follow up on all of your questions, on all of your concerns, but I know we will keep this conversation going. Pastor Glenn, I'm going to let you have a final word before I simply say this. I'll let you, give us a nice little final wrap up here. The thing that I want us to lean into, Pastor Glenn's talked about this with the history of Trinity. Some of the things that I deeply value, that we will be sharing, that we value as a congregation, leaning into our values, is really a next generation mindset, and it is to be a community of grace, and to really be a people that believe in relationships. The diversity of thought, we are not all the same. Relationships matter, and so we want to lean into these relationships because I think we are a better church for it. And the other thing I always say is church is every day. So we at Trinity will provide all the resources that we can to help people walk in their faith with Jesus Christ. Because for me, church is every day. And for me, Trinity's an awesome congregation. And, part of that is because we've had great pastors like Pastor Bruce and all the folks before Pastor Bruce, Pastor Glenn, Pastor Ron, and for really the people of the church, the laity, the people that are watching this right now that get to continue to tell the story of God's love in Jesus Christ. So, friends, let's keep leaning into who we are, what we value, what we believe. Pastor Glenn, give us the final word before we call it a night. Thank you.
Okay. I think, Michael, one of the things that I would just close with is a few weeks ago, I was able to have a meeting with the district clergy at Trinity. And we talked about a little bit, just slightly, our diversity. And but as I close it out, I would say the same thing to the Trinity congregation. I shared with all the clergy that day that regardless of what are the things that divide us or where we are different, I made the comment, my expectation is your district superintendent is you will get up every day and you will go work for the kingdom of God, to bring the kingdom of God here on earth, and that you will share Christ in your words and your actions. That yes, we will work through the diversity, but that is the expectation that I have. And I think that's really the expectation I had the day I walked out of Trinity, and as I continue to remember the wonderful memories of Trinity, that would be the expectation I would have. Just a few hours ago, we've all gotten that shock of what has happened in Texas, the unbelievable again. And, people don't need to see us fighting. What they need to see right now is a hand of love, arms of grace, and someone to cry with them and let them know that God is alive and with us. And that's exactly what we can do in the community. So I would really just encourage you to continue to do that, and appreciate that ministry that has kept me going too. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night, everybody. Continue to ask questions or make comments. We will follow up with them the best that we can. May you be filled with grace and peace tonight. Good night.